So how's it hanging, guys? Gobble. Gobble. Gobbly gobble. Gobble gobble. It's fine, I don't bite kids.
It doesn't matter what kind of system you're playing, there's something that we all use in every single one, and that's factions. And from the player's perspective, they can seem like they're just a side quest that you complete, and once it's done, you just move past them and never hear from them again. Once you hit a certain level, they almost seem obsolete. And that's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. How to make factions that don't have finish lines, ones that aren't built with specific goals in mind, but rather interests that are ongoing, persistent, and sometimes maddening. So let me show you how you can start building them without storylines that have endings, and we'll start treating them like institutions with interests that never stop. A reoccurring theme that I've seen in many games is that the players start at level 1 in a small town. There's a local thieves guild. The guild is menacing and the players have a few run-ins and it's good stuff. And then the players level up and they start going further afield. And they start dealing with regional politics and planar incursions. You know, normal Tuesday stuff. And somewhere around level 8, someone goes, "Hey, whatever happened to Emberhand Thieves Guild?" And you go, I guess they're still in the starter town. And that's that. Why would Emberhand matter now? The players are fighting things that could destroy the Emberhand with a flick of the wrist. They have just become a painting on a wall. They look like part of the world but have no real depth or agency or even presence. They're just a scenery now. This is called zoom locking. You built a faction for a specific geographic and narrative moment, and when the camera zoomed out, they had no way to stay in frame. And the reason it happens is, again, because you built them around a goal. The goal was to cause trouble in the starter town, the players leave that starter town, and the goal becomes irrelevant. The Night's Watch from Game of Thrones is the textbook example. In the books and show, they're genuinely compelling early on, the ancient Brotherhood guarding against something most people have forgotten to fear. But as the story scales up to continental warfare and dragon politics, they get weirdly sidelined, because at their core they were built around a place, the wall. Their goal is to defend this specific wall. Once the story stopped caring about that wall, they had nothing to scale with. If you compare that to the Brotherhood of Steel from Fallout, depending on which game you play and how you play through them, they're an ally or an enemy, but they are never irrelevant. Why is that? Because their interest isn't accomplishing a task. Their interest is technology monopoly. They believe that advanced technology should only be in their hands. That interest they have doesn't care what level you are, and it doesn't care where you are. You found a laser rifle, they want it. You discovered a pre-war laboratory, they want it. You are a walking arsenal of gear and power armor. Congratulations, you are now a person of interest to the Brotherhood of Steel. They never become set dressing because they are always watching and their interest is eternal, which therefore makes their relevance eternal. And that's the difference I'm going to try and show you here, is that it's not about how complex they are or how much lore you've created. It literally all boils down to whether their reason for existing can follow the players wherever they go. So let's look at the difference between interests and goals. A goal is a completable, you know, retrieve the sacred artifact, destroy the rival guild, assassinate a king. You can finish it, you can draw a line through it, and once it's done, that momentum stops. An interest is structural. It's what the faction is, not what it wants to do at this precise moment. It doesn't get completed, it just operates and shapes every goal they ever pursue. But it's never satisfied, because satisfying it really isn't the point. It's about maintaining it. Let me give you a nasty example to really drive this idea home. So you've got a faction, let's just call them memory thieves, which is a cool concept. They steal people's memories. They could do it literally or maybe metaphorically. Now we have two versions of the same faction. In version 1, the players discover the memory thieves have stolen a powerful secret from a city elder contained in a magical jar. The mission is to get the jar back. The players infiltrate, fight some thieves, retrieve the jar, the memory thieves are defeated, roll the credits. Which is a fun heist, is fine, but it's a goal. Once the jar is back, the faction's narrative function is kind of over. In version 2, the memory thieves don't actually care about any specific jar. What they care about is no one in this city should be able to fully trust their own memories. Their interest is about monopolizing social trust. If no one can actually verify their own past and every contract is suspect, every and any witness can be discredited. Then the memory thieves can become the only institution in the city whose word means anything. They effectively become the city's legal system, its court of record, you know? So retrieving the jar is just one session in an ongoing campaign, because even if you get it back, their interest continues. They're already working on 3 people, they've already planted doubt in the city council, and they're already turning an architecture of daily life into a maze of paranoia. And you can even see from this example just how easy it is to turn an idea from a goal into an interest, and how you don't have to actually create a whole new faction just to do so, you know? And to all the Dune fans, I'm probably about to give you what might be the most devastating example of this distinction anywhere in fiction. The Fremen, the desert warriors. Paul Atreides bonds with them, fights alongside them, and ultimately fulfills a prophecy with them. And their goal, the thing they've been working towards for generations, is terraforming Arrakis, turning the desert green, paradise and all that. Spoiler alert, Paul helps them achieve it, and it destroys them, because their interest, the thing that actually made them them, was survival in the deep desert. The scarcity and the harshness, the constant battle against an environment trying to kill them. That was the engine of everything, their culture and religion and fighting style. It was their identity. All of it ran on a fuel of scarcity, and once you remove that scarcity, you achieve the goal, if you get me. What's left is like a hollowed out bureaucratic merchant style wearing Fremen clothing. Paul didn't conquer the Fremen, he completed their quest, and that was enough to end them. So you can really see how completing a goal can actually kill a faction, whereas pursuing their interest keeps them alive forever. And this is the difference between like a book and a role-playing game. The book has to really have a final conclusion at the end, whereas role-playing games don't finish, they continue on. Something else I noticed that does kill factions at higher levels is physics. And I specifically mean the physics of combat. At level 1, a guild enforcer showing up can be a threat, but that same guild enforcer at level 12 doesn't even register, it's not worth your time. Your players would just obliterate them. So to remedy this, DM, stop sending factions entirely. The guild becomes irrelevant because the players have simply outscaled their capacity for violence. But here's what you're actually forgetting. Violence is only one kind of leverage, and honestly, for factions it's usually the most dumbest and expensive kind. Think about it. In real life, a powerful organization doesn't usually come at you with fists. It comes at you with paper, lawyers, degrees, trade restrictions, or licensing requirements, frozen assets, you know, revoke titles, or maybe just a carefully worded letter to exactly the right person suggesting that your reputation might not be what it once was. Your level 15 wizard can absolutely fireball a tax collector, but he can't fireball the tax law, you know? And this is what organizational leverage looks like, and how factions stay terrifying no matter how overpowered your players become. The Grey Wardens are another great example. They have power called the right of conscription. Essentially, in times of blight, a Grey Warden can legally draft anyone into service. Anyone. Doesn't matter who you are, what you've done, what you think of them. Your favorite NPC? They get conscripted. One of the party members' mentors? Conscripted. The king of the nation? Technically could be conscripted. This isn't about rolling for initiative and starting combat. It's just exercising the legal right, and there is nothing you can do about it without becoming an enemy of the order that exists to save the world. That's the kind of faction that can threaten high-level players without ever drawing a sword, because their interest is fighting the blight. So when you're scaling a faction's pressure on your players, think about what kind of leverage matches their power level. In early games, this could be like physical threats, guards, assassins, public confrontations. In the middle of your game, this could be social and economic threats like reputation damage, market manipulation, or political pressure. And then in later games, this could be institutional threats, legal authority, religious sanction, trade blockades, or access to resources the players actually depend on. The faction shouldn't stop caring about the players just because the players got stronger. When you create really persistent factions, they just shift in approach, like water finding a new route. Alright, now I've convinced you. Great. So how do you actually do it? Here are 4 tools I use every time I'm building a faction that I want to feel real. The first is a narrative clock. I don't use clocks to track how close the players are to winning, I use them to track how close the faction is to getting what they want, with or without player interference. So instead of a clock, the players have 4 sessions to stop whatever the faction was up to. Instead of that, try something like the Merchants League is 6 steps from passing the Anti-Magic Commerce Act. Each step represents a real in-world action they're taking: bribing a council member, silencing a critic, publishing a pamphlet. The clock ticks whether the players engage with them or not, and when it fills, the law passes. Now, buying spell components requires a government license, or healing services get taxed, and your Wizard's Workshop needs to be inspected quarterly. It's not about the players failing a quest, it's about the world changing because they weren't paying attention. It's more of a consequence. Second is the asymmetric rule rewrite. Every faction, when operating at full strength, should change the rule of the world that the players rely on. Pick something mechanical, something that the players take for granted. The Thieves Guild make witnesses unreliable. Suddenly, when you try to establish an alibi, your contacts are either gone or won't talk. The Sapphire Enclave requires ritual permission to move through wilderness, and vast travel now has a toll. The Inquisition makes rests in cities conditional, and you can't long rest unless your lodging is approved. It doesn't have to be huge, it can just be felt by the players, you know? Because the moment a faction costs the players something tangible, it becomes more real, and it's no longer abstract lore. It's a thing that is making their lives harder right now. The third thing is about scaling leverage. This one is simple. As players level up, the faction shouldn't send bigger guys, it should send different leverages. At level 5, they bribe the City Watch to harass the party. Level 10, they revoke the party's legal status in the region. Level 15, they file a religious tribunal against the party's cleric. And at level 20, they call in an ancient debt that forces a neutral nation to deny the party sanctuary. The faction is always the same. The players are just growing, and instead of the faction fading, it adapts. And the fourth and final thing is the interest's first leader. Your faction leader shouldn't want to kill players. They shouldn't even necessarily want to fight them. They should want something specific and structural, control over a specific law of the world, and they should pursue it with relentless, unsexy, slightly tedious dedication of someone who has been doing this for 30 years. Think of Billy Kimber from Peaky Blinders, if you've seen it. He doesn't care about the Shelby family as people, he cares about controlling the racing bets. As long as that's threatened, he is a problem. The moment it isn't, he's perfectly happy to leave you alone. He's not evil, he isn't even a villain. He's just a man protecting his interests with every tool available to him. That's the kind of faction leader that lingers in your players' memories, not the one who monologues about their tragic past, but one who, 3 sessions after the player thought they dealt with him, sends a perfectly polite letter explaining that the party's business license has been revoked in 4 cities due to a regulation they weren't even aware of. And if you want to see how factions with real, conflicting interests should work, you should check out The Streets of Port Noir by Obvious Mimic. It's a solo 5e adventure set in a corrupt city where every power player has their own agenda. There's Manny, the floating skull who hires you and doesn't trust you. There's Lesator, the rain demon, who runs the Sunken Market, a black market beneath the harbour where the dead trade alongside the living, and where failing to deliver earns you a spot as a bone chandelier. You can use my promo code FLAMYDM10. I'll leave a link in the description, and you can also check out their other solo adventures while you're there. And thank you Obvious Mimic for the sponsor. Look, you can ignore all of this and still run great games. I've done it. We've all done it. Sometimes you just need a boss fight with a flag and that's fine. But when you want a world that feels inhabited, and you want your players to feel like they're moving through a political ecosystem rather than a series of connected rooms, this is the thing you have to get right. Factions are not storylines, they're not quest givers, they're not even set dressing, they're institutions that have interests, and interests don't have ending scenes. The test I use now is, whenever I'm building a faction, can they still matter in 10 sessions if the players never interact with them? If the answer is yes, they're ticking away in the background accumulating power. Reshaping the world, building towards something. If the answer is no, I've built a plot device, not a faction. Stop being a historian, documenting your world's drama, and start being an architect, designing the systems the players have to live inside. Factions are only as real as the price it charges. If their existence doesn't make your players' lives more complicated, more expensive, or more uncertain, they are just furniture. I mean, nice furniture maybe, but they're still furniture. Build the institutions, give them weapons, let them want things that don't require your players' attention to keep wanting. So how do you build factions in your games? Have you ever come across this same problem? If you're a player, has there been a faction that you thought was really interesting but faded out as you leveled up? Or if you've had a really great experience with a faction that stayed throughout the entire campaign, let us know in the comments and let's get debating. Thank you for watching, and as always, stay spicy, adventurers.